Will the shallow, moist layer overperform, or is this going to be the case of the tornado that could have been? I'm Gabriel Harber. He's Cameron Nixon, and you are watching the Storm Chasing Forecast Show for Saturday, May 30th. Cameron, how you doing today, man?
What's going on? I'm doing just dandy. How you doing, Gabe?
I'm doing great, and you know what I love to hear? When you and I were doing our pre-show planning, you talked about how this is a very tricky setup, and I know what that means. That means
Yep.
I'm about to get some S-tier Cameron Nixon analysis, so I am super
Yes,
excited to dive in.
we're gonna dig into this for sure.
Before we get started, I do want to let everyone know that this show is brought to you by Weatherfront. That's actually the browser app up on the screen in front of you right now. Best weather app on the planet, and you won't have to wait much longer if you are hoping to get your hands on the browser app. That is actually going to be releasing sometime within the next week or two. In fact, I would probably look for it sometime around the end of next week. And of course, there's the mobile app for all of you folks who just want to go the traditional route. So go ahead and check out that link in the description. 7-day free trial if you've never signed up before. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into it, Cameron. The first thing we're going to talk about, the Oklahoma-Kansas boom-bust setup. And I love that you're starting off with this because it's not necessarily the conventional play that people are going to be looking at when they first pop open their browsers and take a look at today's setup.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I almost kind of disagree. It seems like one of the more obvious targets. That could just be the way that I work. It's a triple point play. There's a lot of cape there, but we'll go into why it might not be the greatest. And just for a tiny little, synoptic primer, I think this really lays home the theme of May 2026. You have this rockin' negatively tilted trough entering the plains. And as you can see throughout the day, it just gets more diffuse and we just weaken. Our entire wind fields weaken over the course of the day. And so I think I was telling you earlier that this seems like a setup that could have been if we had a rocking jet really nosing into our area and not decaying, but you had an amplifying system. I think we have pretty much everything set for a widespread, severe, and even tornado outbreak. I just don't think the shear profile, and there's a lot of things that are miscombobulated today, and I don't think that's going to be as conducive for that outcome. I'll go into the Kansas-Oklahoma play. As you could see, shear gets weaker down there. I'll actually just throw up shear to get an idea of how much deep layer shear we have throughout the setup. And it's not great, right? You see these blues contoured at probably about 30 knots or so. And so really just confined to this dry line area. Anything outside of this, really piddly. And so I'll look at our surface pattern. We have a lee low setting up east of the Rockies as that jet streak comes in. Not too surprising here, but we have a broad field of southeasterly flow. And then we have somewhat of a warm front setting up. And this warm front's actually been chilling overhead Norman the last few days. We've had some nice, bubbly, 3 capey looking cumulus. And I've been just tasting the 3 cape in this air mass day by day. And it's still here. It's still here. It's going to end up in Kansas. And you really, anytime you get this broad southeasterly upslope flow, that can generally be a green flag for tornado activity, especially on the high plains. I think this is where SPC's risk is highest right now. Down here in Oklahoma, where you're hoping for more of a classic dry line, you really don't have one. You're just a little bit more diffuse here. Maybe it's just because, no, yeah, you just have a really diffuse dry line here. And I think that's going to spell us some issues. So if you look at, to me, it looks like the most obvious target point is somewhere where you have that diffuse dry line intersecting with that 3 kb air mass up here. So this is what I call the boomer bust target. And throughout the day, we can go 5 o'clock or so and pluck a sounding. And what we really have going for us is cape. We have a lot of cape. And that 73 dew point here, this is the RAPS forecast, by the way, which is usually conservative on dews. I don't, I have no reason to not really believe that we'll hit over 70 here because we've been over 70 all day here in northern Oklahoma. And then you have this nice southeasterly flow enlarging these photographs. So even though we don't have much upper level flow, you still have these nice curved photographs. So for me, this will do it for me. This might even get me out the door to head up that way.
I have a question about that photograph. I think I would be derelict in my duty if I didn't focus on that for a second. given what you're known for. What
Yes.
kind of tornado would we be looking at with that type of photograph if we did have something pop off today?
Very good questions. What I like to see here is that we have strong low-level flow. So even though we don't have much SRH, it's possible that we have strong low-level shear in the form of friction near the ground. I definitely think there's enough mid-level flow to support supercells, and that's pretty obvious in most cam output. However, and maybe this is where you're going with this, but something that I do see as a potential here is deviant tornadoes, especially if we go forward a couple hours. You might expect the low-level jet to strengthen, so we might go a little bit later in the evening, maybe 8 o'clock or so, and get a photograph that looks a little bit more enlarged like that. And so, as most of you, I love my deviant tornadoes. They're probably going to move somewhere north, northwest if we do have something like that. So just something to remain cautious of. This low-level jet is not raging. I don't think these might be particularly dangerous, but if you have a mostly stationary storm motion, I would not recommend spotting north of our supercells tomorrow.
And then one other thing I wanted to ask you about as well, since you used the word on multiple occasions, diffuse. What does that
Yeah,
mean exactly for those who might be trying to learn the ropes, and why is
yeah.
that something that's not necessarily conducive for severe thunderstorm potential?
Yeah, so usually when you want, especially when you're in a really dry environment, you need a lot of forcing to get storms to go up. And so you generally want more concentrated, more convergence along your boundaries like this. And we're going to talk about this setup later. What you don't necessarily want to see is something like this, where we have we really don't have a single dry line. We just have a very slow progression of dew points from West Texas into southern Oklahoma. So there's really not that kind of like specific forcing mechanism there. And if you do have one, maybe you do have enough convergence here. Your dew points are only 56 here in Childress. This is really not going to be great. What we want, and what a big problem for tomorrow is going to be, is we want a storm to initiate in this really nice 3 kp air mass here with all these low-level dew points. And what I fear for this target in particular is that we start initiating in this air mass here, because if you start plucking soundings, you get these really deep inverted V's with very minimal sin here. And especially if you moisten up here, it's going to be very easy to get convection here. And it's not going to be the convection you want. We have very weak shear up here, weak cape, very high bases. And if you end up getting too much convection here, which you could, things could grow upscale pretty quickly. I'm thinking especially along the triple point here, this icky diffuse dry line and this warm sector here. Yeah, look at that. So this is going to be very favorable for CI, and it's not exactly clear what that evolution is going to be.
By the way, you gave me an incredible shirt idea that I think at some point we're going to put in the SEC merch store. You were
Please.
talking about tasting the three cape, and all I could think of is getting like the
Yes.
Skittles logo instead of taste the rainbow. Just taste the three cape, and maybe
Yeah, that's
you're put
good.
your face in the middle of the Skittles rainbow or something like that. Taste the three cape.
Royalties, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know how we roll here at SEC. Absolutely. So, all right,
That's
Cameron.
good
If
to
if
know.
you don't have anything else for this particular part of the setup, I do see the next thing on your list is the Northwest Kansas tornado potential. So,
Yeah.
what are you thinking about over there?
Yeah, so this is where my ears start to perk up a little bit. I think we do potentially have enough convergence along this
Pun
warm
intended.
front.
We do have enough convergence. Dew points. I was thinking dew points. We do have enough convergence.
I'm gonna forget you said that, but Northwest Kansas into Northeast Colorado, I kind of consider this a similar setup. Look at that nose of dews up into probably the Ray area, down to Atwood and Colby. And so what you said at the beginning is gonna remain true here. It's the shallowness of our moist layer. So if you pluck a sounding here, you're probably gonna see that. And look at that. We have 68-degree dews, but we really taper off after this. So I go back and forth on this. I know there's a lot of people who are deep moisture truthers, and mostly to get CI, it really helps if you have deep moisture. So I think that's going to be one of the failure modes for this setup is that maybe you don't get CI. So that's completely valid. However, shallow moisture is time and again a very good a feature for photogenic supercell and tornado environments. You're really just sucking your moisture from near the ground. You're very dry loft. You could, in theory, produce some very photogenic tornadoes with this environment. You have enough shear, it's perpendicular to that warm front, so you're going to get supercells if you get sustained initiation. And can we just appreciate this cape? This is insane. And this is a result of getting, is there three? Yeah. So surface-based three cape of over 200 for a surface-based parcel. So really what we're doing is we're cramming in these really high dew points under a very cold bowling ball upper level low. To me, this screams tornado potential. Now, I just don't think that we have the convergence here to get widespread storms, but all it takes is one or two. And I think we could be dealing with, back in 2021, May 26th, we had the Bankelman tornado and a few others up north that I really mistargeted that day.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember we actually talked to each other in the gas station parking lot in Colby, I believe.
that was that day. That was
Yeah,
the
right
day.
before we busted down in central western Kansas and just sat there watching towers go up and immediately
Yep.
die out.
So maybe that's the theme for tomorrow. Don't bust down here. Go up here. That's at least my inkling. I think there's a greater potential that you don't see anything, but I think the ceiling for tornadoes is definitely higher up here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see something stupid out of today.
So, two questions about that, real quick. First of all, you talked about how the moisture has that sort of nose up there.
Yeah.
Is a lot of what makes that desirable the fact that it really gets those winds backing almost straight out of the east?
Yeah, it'll increase your level shear and also provide more convergence at the surface. So if I look at a photograph, it's quite long. Honestly, looking at this ties with a lot of ridiculously photogenic tornado analogs if you go through our Chase archive. This looks really good. I can't beat around the bush.
Shout out to the Chase Archive, real quick. Tell them about that.
Yes. So if you go to chasearchive.com, you can find historical analogs for some really good tornado soundings. And I really don't have a whole lot of analogs for this that I can think of off the top of my head, but it has all the key features. It is fairly moderate LCLs, really dry air loft, huge cape, and then just enough bulk shear. So that's definitely what I'm favoring here. And I think a big issue is you can get CI all the way up and down this feature, but if we pop too much convection down here and grow upscale, I'm actually, I'll cheat and show some cam output. I think the NAM will probably show this pretty well. You have a couple isolated things. This one goes kaput in the NAM land. Maybe you have this string of convective storms that looks actually pretty formidable. Each of this could literally be a string of pearls of supercells because we're dealing with this really shallow moisture layer. You're very unlikely to grow upscale initially. So this is definitely a signal that would get me kind of agitated in a good way. This stuff down here, though, this is the big if. It's like, how quickly does this grow upscale? And does this ultimately knock into this stuff and by default make it grow upscale? That's a mess. If we didn't have this stuff here, I'd be hauling it to Northwest Kansas.
And just remember, folks, that an agitated Cameron quickly turns
Yeah,
into a Cameron Nimbus
it
after.
does. It does actually. It starts precipitating.
All right. Is there anything else you wanted to mention in regards to this, which is probably going to end up being the more conventional of the plays? If you had to guess tomorrow, probably where the most people are going to target.
Yeah, I would at least where I'd recommend most people to target is somewhere here in central Kansas to give you the option of maybe going down south or hoping for something to fire up here near Colby.
Now, what if I'm an absolute sicko and I decide I just want to play around with some Panhandle Dryline slop? Maybe I'm in
Yeah,
Lubbock and I just can't get out to go up, can't be bothered to drive all the way up into Kansas. What are we looking at over there?
that's a great question. We can pull some soundings and see how sloppy it will actually be. And we're going, NAM 3K is usually the most enthusiastic about dew points down here. I simply don't think it will be enough. A lot of soundings I've been plucking have this kind of, oh, this is contaminated, but a deep kind of inverted V profile down there, which if you get convection, it's probably going to be pretty downbursty, microbursty, could grow upscale pretty quick. I don't even know what this is. I think if you live in Lubbock, I would save your time and emotional well-being and stay home.
I just could hear in my mind that emotional damage meme.
Yeah.
What would happen if you decide to go out there tomorrow? And then that takes us to the last play of the day, which is the Rapid City Hipster play. And I know we have more than a few people here at Storm Chaser Coaching that would love for the Rapid City Hipster play to actually verify. So,
Oh
what are we
yeah.
looking at all the way up north?
Yeah, and if you recall, sheer across the board was pretty weak, and especially gets weak once you get inside this closed upper level low, unfortunately. That said, and I'm trying not to leave anyone out. I think pretty much anywhere here, western Nebraska, even into Wyoming, if the dews slosh west enough, up through Gillette and into Montana, could all be viable targets if you're truly feeling being a hipster today. And what I do see here that does interest me is that same shallow moisture, low level cape, which I truly do love for tornado potential. A lot of cape here too in the lowest part of the profile. It's just that sheer, it's not great. It's just not doing it for me for most of this area. And I can try to give some other places some love. Sheer is just really not that fantastic in this closed upper level low. And that's what happens when you have these closed lows. It's just you have constant wind speeds throughout that column, throughout that circulation. So you really don't build up shear, especially in the mid levels. So if you live around Rapid City or Wyoming Chaser, I'd probably be bopping around outside the house, but not really feeling too confident of something that interesting other than a brief spin up or two. Maybe some hail out this way.
Cameron, I think you wanted to go through a few of the convection allowing models and show us what they're putting out for today, right?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
definitely take a look at that. We have this is just the NAM output for tomorrow. I see some kind of popcorny convection up here near Gillette. Again, just some attempts at stuff pretty much everywhere. This is the NAM. I don't think things are going to grow upscale this quickly out here, but it is possible. I think I saw some other solutions that had large scale MCSs. So I'll throw up the HRRR here. Let's do just so we have a broad suite of ideas. Her is a little bit more aggressive, and I think this is why SPC is maintaining their higher risk over that area with that upscale growth. So very brief window of getting maybe a supercell with some hail before we grow upscale in this kind of area. Grow very upscale at that. Her is maybe just a little bit more enthusiastic about this Oklahoma Kansas target tomorrow. Has a bunch of convection growing up, and again, because of those nice photographs, most of these become supercells and then congeal together in this massive supercell party before everything grows upscale. The HRRR does not like this Northwest Kansas play. The HRRR does not like these shallow moist layers either, so that's something to look out for. Maybe RFS will give us something that's kind of in between. Oh, geez, I don't want to spoil it. That doesn't look good. Yeah, RFS, as some of this northeastern Colorado stuff, really does not have the Kansas play. Maybe just some glimpses of convection out here. I don't know if this is elevated or not, but generally has a decent signal, maybe not as good as the NAM. But then you go to Oklahoma. I don't even know if this is actually going to happen. If it does, that kind of sucks. But you get this kind of massive supercelly blob here over Oklahoma and Kansas, which is pretty much what we've been predicting.
Remember to check out those links in the description below and then watch another video.